The studio lights dimmed for just a moment, and in that silence, something extraordinary happened. Steve Harvey, mid-sentence during his usual banter with the Rodriguez family, stopped talking. Not because he forgot his line, not because of a technical glitch, but because he saw something in contestant Sarah Mitchell's eyes that made his heart skip a beat. It was Tuesday afternoon at the Steve Harvey Show studios in Atlanta, and what started as another regular taping was about to become the most emotional moment in daytime television history. Sarah Mitchell, 52, stood at the contestant podium, wearing a navy blue dress she'd bought specifically for this occasion. Her silver hair was perfectly styled, her makeup carefully applied to hide the exhaustion that had become her constant companion over the past 6 months. She'd driven 14 hours from small-town Kentucky with her sister Linda, both of them clutching lottery tickets and dreams of meeting the man who had been making their family laugh for decades. But Sarah wasn't there for herself. Every answer she gave, every smile she managed, every moment she stood under those bright studio lights was for someone who couldn't be there, someone who was lying in a hospital bed 400 miles away, watching every second of this taping on a small tablet screen, fighting for every breath while her daughter fought for something more precious than prize money. The game had started normally enough. Sarah's family, the Mitchells from Bardstown, Kentucky, faced off against the Patterson family from Miami. Steve worked the crowd with his signature energy, cracking jokes about Sarah's husband Tom's answer to name something that gets bigger as you get older. Tom had confidently said belly, earning the number 2 spot on the board, and a hearty laugh from Steve. "That's right, Tom. Speaking from experience, brother," Steve had joked, patting his own stomach while the audience roared with laughter. The energy was infectious, the families were competitive but good-natured, and everything was going exactly as producers hoped. But during the 4th round, when Steve asked Sarah to step up to the podium for her turn, something shifted. The question was innocent enough. Name something people do when they want to feel closer to someone they love. Sarah approached the microphone, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the podium edges. The studio audience waited. Steve waited. The cameras captured every second as Sarah opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again. Her composure, which had held steady for the entire game, began to crack. "Take your time, Sarah," Steve said gently, noticing her distress. No pressure here. But Sarah wasn't struggling with the answer. She knew exactly what people did when they wanted to feel closer to someone they loved. She'd been doing it every day for 6 months. The struggle was with everything else. The weight of carrying her family's hopes, the exhaustion of being strong for everyone around her, the fear that this might be the last time her mother ever saw her on television. "Steve," Sarah whispered into the microphone, her voice barely audible above the studio's ambient noise. "Can I tell you something?" The audience was still buzzing with energy from the previous answer, but Steve heard the change in her tone immediately. He'd been hosting long enough to recognize when someone was carrying more than just competitive nerves. He set down his cards and took a step closer to her podium. "Of course, sweetheart. What's on your mind?" Sarah looked directly at Steve, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "My mama is dying." The words hit the studio like a physical force. The audience fell silent so quickly it was as if someone had pressed a mute button on the entire room. The Patterson family, still celebrating their previous correct answer, froze mid-celebration. Even the camera operators seemed to sense that something profound was happening. Steve's expression changed completely. The entertainer's mask slipped away, replaced by something much more authentic. He walked away from his host position and approached Sarah's podium, his full attention focused on this woman, who clearly had something important to say. "Tell me about your mama," Steve said softly, his voice stripped of all performance. Sarah took a shaky breath, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "She has stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors said she has maybe 2 weeks left, maybe less." Her voice cracked on the last words. The studio remained in complete silence. 200 audience members held their breath. The competing families watched with growing concern and sympathy. Even the production crew in the control booth had stopped their usual chatter. "She's been watching Steve Harvey for 20 years, Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. "Every morning, every episode. When she was going through her first round of chemo 5 years ago, your show was the only thing that made her laugh, the only thing that made her forget about the pain, even for just a little while." Steve listened intently, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face. This wasn't just another contestant sharing a story. This was a daughter honoring her mother's last wish, carrying a burden too heavy for one person to bear alone. She always said, "Sarah, if I could meet Steve Harvey just once before I die, I could go in peace. That man has given me so much joy." So when we got selected for the show, she was more excited than she'd been in months. She bought a new nightgown for the hospital so she could look pretty while watching me on TV. The emotion in the studio was palpable. Several audience members were openly crying. The Patterson family had abandoned their competitive stance entirely, their faces filled with compassion for Sarah and her family's situation. Steve reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his pocket square, the crisp white fabric he always kept perfectly folded. Without saying a word, he gently handed it to Sarah, who accepted it with trembling hands. "Sarah," Steve said, his own voice now thick with emotion, "where is your mama right now?" "Room 3114, at University of Kentucky Hospital," Sarah replied. "She's watching on her tablet. The nurses set it up special so she wouldn't miss this." That's when Steve Harvey made a decision that would change not just this episode, but everyone who witnessed what happened next. He turned to his production team and made a request that had never been made in the show's history. "I need you to get the hospital on the phone," he announced, loud enough for the entire studio to hear. "Right now, I want to talk to Sarah's mama." The audience gasped audibly. This wasn't part of any script. This wasn't planned television. This was Steve Harvey, the man behind the entertainer, making a choice to prioritize human connection over show format. The production assistants scrambled to make the connection work. Within minutes, they had patched through a video call to room 314 at UK Hospital. The studio's main screen, typically used for displaying survey answers, suddenly showed the face of a tiny woman in a hospital bed, oxygen tubes in her nose, but with the brightest smile anyone in that studio had ever seen. "Mrs. Mitchell," Steve called out, walking closer to the screen so she could see him clearly. "This is Steve Harvey." The woman on the screen, despite her obvious frailty, sat up straighter in her hospital bed, her eyes, so similar to Sarah's, filled with tears of joy rather than pain. For the first time in months. "Oh my Lord," she whispered, her voice coming through the studio speakers crystal clear. "Steve Harvey. I can't believe it's really you." "What's your name, beautiful?" Steve asked, his voice gentle and warm. Dorothy Mitchell, but everyone calls me Dot." "Well, Miss Dot, your daughter Sarah is down here representing the Mitchell family with pride. She's been telling me about how much my show means to you, and I need you to know something." Steve paused, looking directly into the camera that was broadcasting to her hospital room. "You have raised an incredible woman. The way she talks about you, the love in her voice, that doesn't happen by accident. That happens because you're an amazing mama." Dot's smile grew even brighter, if that was possible. "She's my pride and joy, that girl. Always has been." Steve nodded, then made another unprecedented move. He gestured to his production team. "Miss Dot, I want you to help us with this game. Sarah's up here trying to win some money for your family, but I think she could use some help from the wisest woman in Kentucky. You ready to play Family Feud with us?" The audience erupted in applause, but this wasn't polite television applause. This was emotional, spontaneous appreciation for what they were witnessing. The Patterson family was cheering just as loudly as the Mitchell family. This had transcended competition. "The question is," Steve continued, reading from his cards, Name something people do when they want to feel closer to someone they love. Miss Dot, what do you think? Without hesitation, Dot's voice came through the speakers. They hold their hand. Steve looked at the board expectantly. Survey says, the number one answer flipped over. Hold hands. Touch. 13. The studio exploded in celebration. Sarah was crying and laughing simultaneously. Steve was grinning from ear to ear. And on the screen, Miss Dot was clapping her hands together, despite the IV lines attached to her arms. But Steve wasn't finished. He walked back to Sarah's podium and did something that no game show host had ever done. He took off his suit jacket, the same jacket he wore for every taping, his signature piece that had become part of his television persona. Sarah, he said, draping the jacket around her shoulders, I want you to take this back to your mama, and I want you to tell her that every laugh I've given her over the years, every moment of joy my show brought to her life, it all came back to me today tenfold. Because meeting both of you reminded me why I do what I do. The jacket was too big for Sarah's frame, but she wore it like armor, like a shield of love and respect. The cameras captured every moment as she pulled it tighter around herself, overwhelmed by the gesture. And Miss Dots, Steve called out to the screen, I want you to know that you're not just watching this show anymore. You're part of our Family Feud family forever. Sarah's going to bring that jacket to you, and every time you see it, I want you to remember that you matter. Your life matters. The love you've given matters. Dot's voice came through the speakers one more time, stronger than before. Thank you, Steve. Thank you for giving my baby this moment. This is the best day I've had in months. The show continued, but it was transformed. Both families played together, calling out answers, celebrating every point as one team. The Patterson family had completely abandoned any desire to win, instead focusing on making sure Sarah's family had the best possible experience. When the final round ended, both families had won the maximum prize money, a decision Steve made unilaterally and the producers supported without question. As the cameras stopped rolling and the audience began to file out, something unprecedented happened. People didn't leave. Instead, they approached Sarah, sharing their own stories of loss, of love, of family members they'd cared for during illness. The studio became an impromptu support group, a place where strangers became family through shared human experience. Steve remained on stage long after his official hosting duties were over, talking with Sarah about her mother's care, about resources available to families dealing with cancer, about the importance of making every day count. He gave Sarah his personal phone number, not for publicity, not for follow-up interviews, but because he understood that sometimes people need to know they're not alone in their struggle. The episode aired 3 weeks later, exactly as it happened, with no editing to remove Steve's unprecedented decision to break formats. The response was unlike anything in daytime television history. The show received over 200,000 messages from viewers sharing their own stories of family, illness, and love. Hospital patients across the country reported that the episode had given them hope during their darkest moment. But the most important response came from room 314 at University of Kentucky Hospital. Miss Dot lived for 6 more weeks after the taping, far longer than doctors had predicted. She spent those weeks wearing Steve's jacket every day, watching that episode repeatedly, and telling everyone who would listen about the day her daughter met Steve Harvey and brought the whole family together. When Dot passed away peacefully in her sleep on a Tuesday morning, Sarah was holding her hand, wearing the same navy dress she'd worn to the show. The last words Dot spoke were about the episode, about how proud she was of Sarah, about how Steve Harvey had given them both a gift they'd treasure forever. At the funeral, Sarah wore Steve's jacket. It had become more than a piece of clothing. It was a symbol of connection, of the moment when a game show became something sacred, when entertainment became ministry, when a television host became a source of healing for a family facing the unthinkable. Steve attended the funeral not because it was good publicity, but because Miss Dot had become part of his family the moment she appeared on that hospital room screen. He spoke at the service, not about the show or the episode, but about a woman who had taught him that the most important moments in television happen when you stop performing and start caring. The jacket now hangs in Sarah's closet, but its real power isn't in the fabric or the designer label. It's in what it represents. Proof that in a world often focused on division and difference, human compassion can break through any barrier. That sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply acknowledge someone's pain and let them know they're not alone in carrying it. 6 months later, Sarah established the Dorothy Mitchell Foundation, providing tablet devices to hospital patients so they could stay connected with their families during treatment. The foundation's motto, suggested by Steve Harvey himself, reads, "Because love never goes off the air." The episode became a teaching tool in medical schools, not for its entertainment value, but as an example of how small acts of kindness can have profound healing effects. Nursing students watch it to understand the importance of seeing patients as whole human beings, with families who love them, not just medical cases to be managed. Steve Harvey, who had made America laugh for decades, learned something that day that changed how he approached every show, every contestant, every moment he spent in front of those cameras. He learned that sometimes the most important victory isn't winning the game. Sometimes it's simply showing up for someone who needs to know they matter. The tablet that Miss Dot used to watch the show still works. Sarah keeps it charged and occasionally plays the episode, not to relive the sadness of her mother's final weeks, but to remember the joy on Dot's face when Steve Harvey called her beautiful, when he asked for her help, when he made her feel like the most important person in the world. Because that's what love looks like. That's what hope sounds like. And that's what happens when a daughter's devotion meets a man's compassion, creating a moment that reminds us all that even in our darkest times, we are never truly alone. The studio lights may have dimmed that day, but the light of human kindness burned brighter than ever, proving that sometimes the most powerful entertainment is simply witnessing authentic human connection. Steve Harvey didn't just host a game show that afternoon. He participated in something much more important, a reminder that love transcends all boundaries, even the boundary between life and death. And somewhere, in the space between laughter and tears, between performance and authenticity, between television and real life, Miss Dot's spirit lives on, still watching, still smiling, still proud of the daughter who loved her enough to share their story with the world. The legacy continues in every act of kindness, inspired by their story, proving that love never goes off the air. The ripple effects of that Tuesday afternoon continued to spread far beyond what anyone could have imagined. The episode became a cultural phenomenon, not because of its production value or entertainment factor, but because it captured something increasingly rare in modern media: genuine human connection in its purest form. Medical professionals began incorporating the episode into their training programs. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, Chief of Oncology at Emory University Hospital, made it required viewing for all residents. This 7-minute segment teaches more about patient care and family dynamics than most textbooks, she explained to her students. Watch how Steve Harvey demonstrates perfect bedside manner without any medical training. He sees the person, not the illness. The impact on other families facing similar situations was immeasurable. Cancer support groups across the country reported that patients who had seen the episode showed improved morale and increased engagement with their treatment plans. The simple act of witnessing Miss Dot's joy in her final weeks gave countless other patients permission to find moments of happiness amid their struggle. Sarah received thousands of letters from viewers who shared their own stories of loss, love, and the healing power of laughter. One letter particularly moved her. It was from a 45-year-old man in Oregon whose father had been battling Alzheimer's disease. He wrote that after watching the episode with his father, they had spent 3 hours looking through old photo albums and laughing together for the first time in months. Your courage to share your story gave me courage to connect with my dad while I still can. he wrote. The episode's influence extended into unexpected areas. Several major television networks began developing policies encouraging hosts to respond authentically to contestants' emotional needs, even if it meant deviating from planned programming. The Steve Harvey standard became shorthand in the industry for prioritizing human compassion over production schedules. Steve himself was profoundly changed by the experience. In interviews months later, he would often reference that day as a turning point in his understanding of his role as a television host. "I used to think my job was to make people laugh," he said during a particularly candid conversation with Oprah Winfrey. "That day with Sarah and Miss Dot taught me that sometimes my job is to make people feel seen, heard, and valued. Laughter is just one tool in that toolkit." The foundation that Sarah established in her mother's memory grew beyond anything she had initially envisioned. Within its first year, the Dorothy Mitchell Foundation had provided tablet devices to over 3,000 hospital patients across 15 states. But the tablets were just the beginning. The foundation also funded family connection specialists, trained volunteers who helped families navigate the emotional challenges of serious illness. One of the foundation's most successful programs was the Dot's Wisdom Circle, support groups for adult children caring for aging or terminally ill parents. The groups met weekly, both in person and virtually, providing a space for caregivers to share their fears, frustrations, and small victories without judgment. Sarah often attended these sessions, still wearing Steve's jacket, which had become a symbol of hope for participants. The jacket itself had become something of a legend. Steve's costume department had tried to provide him with an identical replacement, but he refused to wear it. "That jacket did its job," he explained to his wardrobe supervisor. "It's exactly where it needs to be." Instead, he had a small pin made, a simple golden heart, that he wore on his lapel during every subsequent taping. When contestants asked about it, he would simply say, "It reminds me why I'm here." Back in Bardstown, Kentucky, the local hospital had created a Steve Harvey room, a comfortable space where families could gather during difficult times. The walls were decorated with photos from the episode and quotes from both Steve and Miss Dot. The centerpiece was a large screen television that played family-friendly programming around the clock, including, of course, Family Feud reruns. The room became a sanctuary for families facing their own medical crises. Children waiting while their grandparents underwent treatment could laugh at Steve's jokes. Spouses holding vigil during surgeries could find momentary distraction in the show's warmth. And sometimes, when the weight of worry became too much to bear, people would simply sit quietly and remember Sarah and Dot's story, drawing strength from their example of grace under pressure. Tom Mitchell, Sarah's husband, who had answered Billy to that survey question, found his own way to honor Dot's memory. He began volunteering as a patient transport aide at the hospital, wheeling patients to and from their treatments. Miss Dot always said the smallest kindnesses could be the biggest blessings, he would tell colleagues. Sometimes just having someone walk beside you through the scary parts makes all the difference. The anniversary of the episode's airing became an unofficial holiday in their community. Local restaurants offered free meals to families dealing with medical crises. The high school drama club performed scenes from the episode as part of their annual charity show, and Sarah, every year on that date, would visit patients at the hospital wearing the jacket and sharing her mother's story with anyone who wanted to listen. 5 years after the episode aired, Sarah received an unexpected phone call. It was from a young woman named Maria, calling from Phoenix, Arizona. Maria explained that she had been in the hospital room next to Miss Dot during those final weeks, receiving her own cancer treatment. Through the thin walls, she had heard Dot talking excitedly about the show, watched her replay the episode countless times, and witnessed firsthand the joy it brought to her final days. "Your mother didn't know me," Maria explained, "but her happiness was contagious. Seeing how much that episode meant to her gave me hope when I wasn't sure I could keep fighting. I'm calling because I just graduated from nursing school, and I wanted you to know that your mother's spirit helped save my life. I'm going to spend my career making sure other patients feel as valued as she did that day." The conversation left Sarah in tears, but they were tears of gratitude rather than grief. She realized that her mother's impact had extended far beyond their family, creating ripples of compassion that would continue for generations. Miss Dott's legacy wasn't just in the foundation, or the hospital room, or even the episode itself. It was in every act of kindness inspired by their story, every moment of connection between strangers who recognized their shared humanity. Steve Harvey, now in his 70s, still hosts Family Feud with the same energy and warmth that made him beloved. But those who work closely with him notice a deeper quality to his interactions with contestants. He listens more intently, responds more thoughtfully, and never seems to forget that behind every answer, every laugh, every moment of television, there are real people with real stories worthy of respect and attention. The episode continues to find new audiences through social media and streaming platforms. Young people discovering it for the first time are often surprised by its emotional impact. Comment sections fill with personal stories, from viewers sharing how the episode influenced their own relationships with aging parents or sick relatives. The phrase, "hold their hand," Miss Dott's winning answer, has become a social media hashtag used by people advocating for more compassionate end-of-life care. In a small cemetery in Bardstown, Kentucky, where Miss Dott was laid to rest, visitors often leave small tokens, flowers, notes, and photographs of themselves with loved ones they've lost. Her headstone reads simply, "Dorothy Dott Mitchell, beloved mother, grandmother, and friend to all." The story reminds us that television at its best isn't about ratings or revenue. It's about moments when entertainment becomes ministry, when strangers become family, and when love transcends death to touch hearts worldwide. That's the power of authentic human connection.